beautiful battle we lost, but we have a lot of it. Now, we're heading down to the Charlestown Navy Yard. The USS Constitution down here, Old Ironsides, is the oldest fully commissioned ship in the U.S. Navy. It took about 3 years to build her and 2 sister ships back in the 1790s, and they were built to protect American merchants from pirates. Now, the Constitution was in 44 battles and never lost one. The nickname Old Ironsides came about as the War of 1812. There was a battle off the coast of Nova Scotia between the HMS Gallier and the Constitution. Battle lasted maybe half hour. Gallier went down like a rock in the end. While they fought, though, they saw cannonballs pound the hull of the Constitution. Didn't even make it dead. And as the Gallier was sinking, an officer who stayed aboard went down with the ship. Someone heard him holler, "Good God, her sides must surely be made of iron." Well, language to that effect. And that's where the nickname comes from. But she's not made out of iron. She's made out of oak. It's 2 feet thick. Something like this. There's the Constitution right there, and that's her bow. And she has a full complement of sailors live on board. Maybe 75 sailors live on the ship. And they're all regular Navy. They all graduated from our Naval Academy. Those who do especially well get this assignment, get a little plum assignment for it. And it's, uniform of the day from 1812 and so forth, and they're the ones who do the tours. They do take her out into the harbor several times a year for training cruises and ceremonial events. Sometimes they take her out just to turn her around so she weathers evenly. Sometimes we're looking at her stern. And around sunset, they fire some of her cannons. I don't use the cannonballs anymore, though. Downtown's a mess, Anyway, these people are looking at us. Maybe they just think we're a good-looking group, or... Anyway. Yeah, it's true. People are always staring up, Now, this is Charlestown. We call it Charlestown. The local Indians call this Mishawoman, loosely translates as inland fishing ground. And much like the Shawmut Peninsula, Mishawoman here started out a little tiny piece of land, a couple of square miles, smoking into Boston's inner harbor, sort of a peninsula type thing, kind of a mud flat with a couple of hills. But the Indians used to come here to fish in the summer. In the winter, they were 12 miles west of here, what we call the Blue Hills, 3 steep hills out in the towns of Canton and Milton along the Interstate 95 corridor. And we call that area the Blue Hills, but in the Algonquin language, that area is referred to as Massachusetts, which means those 3 blue hills. And that's where the word comes from. So in the spring of each year, the Massachusetts people would come out of the hills. They'd make their way a dozen or so miles down here towards Mishawoman. And various locations along the way, they'd plant corn, beans, and squash. They called them the 3 sisters. They'd plant them in little clusters. They'd leave them there. They'd fish here all summer. This group preserved their fish with salt. And then in the fall, they'd take their preserved fish back towards Massachusetts, harvesting the corn, beans, and squash as they went. 3 sisters were ripe for picking. And this went on for 7,000 years. So long before they were building pyramids in Egypt, they were fishing here in Charlestown. Now, the early 1600s, you started to see Europeans coming through the Northeast, and they were looking for natural resources mostly, but what they were looking for. The big thing was old-growth wood. They were doing a lot of shipbuilding in the 15 and 1600s as trade started to open up around the world, as people started to expand more than a few miles from the coast. And they used up all the trees in Europe, reality life. So they were here looking for old-growth wood. They were looking for rare earths and animal pelts and fishing grounds, things like this. Nobody had much interest in Mishawoman here. But then John Winthrop and his 700 Puritans were thinking this might be an okay place to create a settlement. So they changed the name here. They honored their king, Charles I. But here's the thing. Winthrop and his party, these were business people seeking economic opportunity in a new world. These people weren't so much on nature. So while there was plenty of decent drinking water here, these people didn't know how to find a decent spring. So they were drinking the water that came through salt marshes and swamps, which tasted pretty much like water that comes through salt marshes and swamps. And just a few months after they got here, by September 1630, most of them couldn't stand Charlestown any longer. Most of them abandoned it. Now, swamp. But some of the earlier explorers had mapped out some springs over there, and they had other attractive features over there as well. They had decent water, other features. They ended up settling on the Shawmut Peninsula, and they renamed that for the fishing village they had come from, Boston, England, St. Botolph's. Now, in those days, Boston was about 3 square miles. What we call Boston today is 52 square miles. Yep, we had a lot of landfill projects over the years. The biggest ones happened between the 1780s and the 1920s. And there were plenty before and after, but the biggest ones. And over the years, we've accumulated towns and villages and harbor islands, and so we cobbled them all into 52 square miles. Charlestown right here was actually a separate town until the 1860s, when it was incorporated into Boston and became one of our neighborhoods. We have 22 neighborhoods in our city. I grew up in a neighborhood called Dorchester, just south of downtown. And then it became a part of Boston in the 1790s. Right now, maybe 700,000 permanent residents are here.